Hey folks, welcome to a new video on Worldographer 2025 version. I'm Joe Wetzel, the creator of the program, and had somebody ask a question about the Isle of Dread map, and that person wanted a copy of the map already pre-made in Worldographer if possible. And I wanted to get back to doing more videos on Worldographer and make them practical. So this video is the result of that. What we're going to do is we're going to take a map that I found online from the X1 Isle of Dread module. However, the one that I've got comes from Thorfinn Tate, who's a great cartographer in the Mystara world. He's probably one of the stars of all of that. In fact, Bruce Hurd, who was editor of the Gazetteer series and wrote the Voyage of the Princess Ark and so forth for Dragon, hired him to do a lot of his maps for his Kaladar series. So what we want to do is we want to create a map, a blank map that we'll be able to use then to trace the map that Thorf had done. I know from just kind of playing with it a little bit before this video, just to kind of prep for it, that we're going to want something that's 38 hexes wide and 58 hexes high, and we're going to use the rows lineup orientation, and we've set this to be blank terrain to start with. I just got to this window here by going to File and New World Kingdom Map, so we hit this, and it creates this. Now I can go ahead and select a file, and it just opens up my computer's folder structure. Doing that kind of reset some of these things. So we're going to do some trial and error though to kind of get at this so you can see how to do this for yourself. And it really is that, you can count things to make a good guess. For example, we did set up our map to be 38 by 58. So let's just start with that and see how close that gets us. And you can see, like, from the distance from the width here of our grid versus the width of the hexes in the map that we're tracing, we are pretty close already. So you can get close just by kind of counting the number of hexes and kind of saying, okay, well, there's one hex approximately for this border here, and likewise a couple of hexes for the top there. So that's how you can get a good starting point. Now, then you can play with these and you can say, okay, is 37 better or not? Like, this is just a little bit too wide. That's just a little bit too small when you're looking at how our grid compares to the grid of the map we're tracing. And a little bit more trial and error, you could do 37.5 and you would see, okay, well, that's almost right, but not quite. So what we actually need is 37.4 with an offset, though, for the height of 0.5. You can see that gets our X lined up, our width lined up perfectly. And then you would do the same sort of process, like I can do 60, and you can see that kind of gets us close, but not quite as you get down towards the bottom. So what it actually turns out is 60.6 is what we need for that. And then for this, it's just ever so slightly off. So negative 0.1 is what I got when I was doing a little bit additional trial and error to get to that. And this gets our grid to all line up very nicely. And then you can play with the opacity. We're just going to leave it at 50%. I noticed as I was playing with this that I needed to actually move this setting and then move it back in order for it to actually register with the program. Sounds like a low priority bug there. And then we can start playing with terrain. So this icon set is kind of a precursor to the icons that Worldographer emulates. Worldographer uses the icons or similar icons to what Mystara had used for the Gazetteers and the Voyage of the Princess Ark and everything in the middle and late 80s kind of in that time frame, whereas these are a little bit more reminiscent of the older ones. So anyway, we can pick the terrain that we want here, and so we're going to pick these mountains here. This is the more recent style from the middle and late 80s, as opposed to these that are an older style and in color as opposed to black and white as the original module is. I did happen to get a few years ago the module in print 1981, and it has a black and white map. Thorf had recreated that here. Let me look to see if he's using the same scale that they are in their map. Turn back a page to get to it. So in this, yes, so it is the same scale that they use. So what we can do here is we can pick the terrain just clicking the points. And I'm going to click the points beyond because we're going to put in a sea colored shape. There's multiple ways to do coastlines. If you want a precise coastline, that's probably the quickest and easiest way to do it. If you notice closely as I was doing these two hexes around 21, there are some sea caves there marked. That's the icon over here, according to Thorpe's key. So we go to features and we can search here for cave and get this. And I do want to override it. I don't want it to be quite so big, so I wanted it to be 50% of a hex. And one was here and the other was there. You can also in the tool, like we can select this. And even before I select it, I could check this box to hide the terrain icon so that you don't see that underlying icon. So it just makes it easier to see the icon that we're placing. But once I've got that, then to do the coastline, well, let me go back to terrain first, and let's just do a couple more up here for this little island up here as well, so I can fill this in. And then I can go to shapes, and I can go to polygon, and I want a shape with no border because I don't want it to have any different color border. And then I can pick the color that I want. Now on this color picker, this row here has colors that match the backgrounds of the default icons. And I happen to know that this one here is the one that matches the regular sea color. So I can just pick this. Now it was already picked because, like I said, I was doing this previously to get ready for the video. So once I've got all that set, then I can just come along here and I can pick this. I can start here, for example, and I can take as much time as I want to be as precise as I want. Now, one of my things with map making, especially these days, is I try not to get too hung up on details. If you think about how accurate real maps of the 1500s, for example, or even earlier, you know, it's not like the explorers got to every little cove and were able to mark it all out precisely. So, you know, if we're not quite perfect, that's okay. You know, different explorers are going to get differing levels of detail. They're going to go and explore that little passage or not, you know, so we can say, hey, we jutted in a little bit too far there. Well, no, that's just, you know, we were more accurate there. Or maybe we weren't. But it's still getting the overall point across that people can work from the map. And if you do want that additional precise detail, then take a little bit more time and get things just right. Now, in Worldographer, this is just one way to do coasts. We have a couple of automatic coast options where if you don't really care, like if you're making your map for the first time and you're not trying to trace something precisely, there are some coast generators that will kind of just go ahead and do it for you. Oh, I got to put in an extra terrain there of mountains. So you can do that where it will add little strips of color, little shapes of land, or you can do them so that they will do exactly this, where it will do little strips of water as opposed to one big long polygon. I'm going to go a little bit further here just to kind of fill this out. And then what I do is I just come away from the coast, one full hex or close to it. So I'm totally covering that hex that we had created. That's, you know, partially water, partially land. So we do that. Let me go back to terrain. Let me just grab this one. And then if I go back down here to trace underlay, I can set this back up to 100%. And then you can see exactly what we had drawn. Because our hexes are blank, you can still see what's underneath here, but everywhere where we actually filled something in, you don't see that underlying image. So let's go back to terrain though here, and we're going to rough in some more terrain. We'll finish off our mountains, for example. So here we can just fill in all of this. We don't need to change the opacity of our map that we're tracing, or our current map that we're creating, I should say. We can just fill this in. And we've got also, there's a couple of little helpful tools, like there is a flood fill thing, which will fill in all of the contiguous blank terrain or terrain that matches whatever type you're clicking on. So if we wanted to change all of this mountains to hills, for example, we can select hills and then drop that on there instead, and all that mountain would change into hills. Or if I did it for the rest of the map, the entire map would change to mountains unless there was some terrain that we had changed to a different type. But we also have a wide area option here, and this just gets the hex we're clicking and each adjacent hex as well. So you got that as an option, but we're going to turn that off because we don't have too much of a wide area to worry about here. And before I move on to a whole nother section, let me just kind of complete this area as part of this map. So now we need to get some jungle, some forest jungle here, and none of it looks really heavy. So we have this here. And I think that these are jungle. Yeah, this area here, I want to say that it's kind of marsh, but let me look at the description of Area 22 in the book since I've got it handy here. Let me see if I can. This is the plateau, but we don't want the plateau. This is Area 22. Okay, well, I'm not going to give away what's in Area 22 in case if you're playing it later, but it doesn't, the description here, it just tells me that there's a lake there, but it doesn't tell me. So I'm going to say that it's marsh, and that makes sense based on what we're seeing. So we're just going to turn this into marsh if you find a better answer for what it is later. That's the nice thing about having this map made in Worldographer. If you need it to be something else, you can make it that. All right. And then what do we got going on up here? Up here we have some broken mountain type stuff, which fortunately we have that icon too. So we've got mountains broken or something like that. Yeah, we have this here, some sort of lava bed. That makes a lot of sense that we've got a volcano there. So we've got this lava bed stuff, and then we can stick this volcano here. And if it's not active, we can switch the icon later. But then we go back to our trace underlay because we want to set this back down to 50% because now we're going to need to rough out or put in that new coastline for those other areas. So I go ahead and hit polygon, and I'm taking the other prior settings, and I'm just going to go ahead and create this one as well. And in this case, we're going to kind of come out, so right now we've just made a polygon that covers the whole thing. So what I can do now is I just kind of wrap around to turn the area into a donut hole, if you will. And now we've got, this all set. And I'll show that in a moment without the trace underlay thing here. Now I'm going to deselect that particular one that we created and create a new one for this island here. So I can do the same thing. Like I said, we've got to go ahead and wrap this thing out so that we make that into a donut hole. Okay, and then we do one more. So I'm going to deselect that one, and let me just move over just a scooch. And if you want to be more precise, you can zoom in and add more points to the shape to get exactly what you want. So we're going to make a new line here, or a new shape. We're going to circle this island again, just like what we did with the others. And I think I need to make sure that I go in an opposite way to my first go around so that all happens properly. And now we've got our donut hole there. And so let's go back to trace underlay, and let's just go ahead and set the opacity back to 100 so you can see all of that filled in like that. All right, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to do the coast for this side over here. Let's just scroll down a little bit more though so that we can make the terrain. Let's continue with our mountains here. We got one mountain, and let's just come down out of this bay and down there. Create a new polygon here, And just, I'm going to start low here so that I can go ahead and build this up. And there we go. I find this in a way kind of therapeutic. I'm not doing it here because I'm recording, but putting on some music in the background and maybe even an audiobook and kind of creating your map as kind of a relaxing sort of thing. I kind of see it. I've almost thought of calling some of these videos The Joy of World Building as an homage to Bob Ross and his joy of painting, of course. But anyway, so now that we've got this all filled in, we can just have that stick out a little bit. And so now we've got that whole coast is all done. We do need to now do this, however. So we're going to go ahead and start deselect the line that we were making. And we're going to do this lake here. And again, it's just, you can give it as much detail as you would like. And if you are off a little bit, there are ways, there's these instructions over here of how to move things around. And so you can just do like an alt click will let you move a point. Alt click allows you to add a point. Control click is what allows you to move a point. And you can see those instructions there. And occasionally when you're clicking, a couple of points will go down at the same time, depending on the quality of your mouse. But you can move things around to get everything just right. And there we go. So that's our lake over there. Let's fill in more terrain over here. Let's do the rest of these mountains. And what we've got going on here, though, is we've got a special line type there. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create two things here. We're going to do, because in order to get the elevation lines to show up, we have to do this as a line, but we also want to have a polygon. So we're going to kind of have to trace this essentially twice. So I hit polygon first, and we're going to set the width to nothing. And we got the color here. The color is set to what I believe is the color that matches this area here. So then we're going to be able to just go ahead and sketch out, trace this again, or trace this for the first time. And then, like I said, we're going to be tracing it again in a moment. It would be nice if it would just copy, but because one is going to be a line and the other is going to be a polygon, I think I can do it as a line with a fill. Let's do it as a line. And we've got it set as an elevation line. And we've got a fill set. We can do the lines with, we'll just do 4 for the moment. Let's see if we're going to do this. We want it to go, well, yeah. Let's see how this works out. We might have to flip that elevation line thing. But it's not filling. So it must be that the polygon won't fill. Or the polygon is set so that it doesn't have a fill, I should say. So we're going to do this the first time this way. All right, so if I had traced this around the opposite direction, then just do a control drag. That's not a control drag. I added a whole bunch of points. Let's do a shift to just delete a few of those extra points. So I can do elevation inverted, which is just going to make that the opposite. And we're going to leave those settings for a moment, but here now we're going to do a polygon. And this time we're going to set it to have no stroke, but it will honor the fill because it's a polygon. So this time we can just do this. And I want this one to be below the other one. So we're going to tweak this So we're going to set it below. We're going to change the z-axis. All of these things within the layer, they're on the same layer because we were accepting the default layer, which is above terrain by default. They're both on the above terrain layer, but within the layer, you can switch them up and down with each other or other objects. So control the order that everything will be drawn. So we're going to push this down to the bottom because we want our line to be on top. And then we're going to go to trace underlay. We're going to set this to 100%. And here we can see our line that we had drawn before. And we can go ahead and go to shapes. And we can now select. And this time we're going to hopefully select the outer shape, which is the line, which this is, I believe. So if we widen it a little bit, we got that. Now, we can control everything here. So we can make the width of those hash marks that are sticking out narrower. We can make the distance apart from each other more or less. We can play with the length of these. You got a lot of control there for all of that. Perspective-wise, I might tweak a couple of those points to get it so that these hash marks aren't jutting up against each other, but you can also spread things out a little bit more to make that easier too if you wanted to. So you've got all these options to play with, but it's just what's good for you. I am going to hold down control and I'm going to try to grab one of those points and stick it out a little bit more. Yeah. Come on, go the right way. Yeah, there we go. So that's how you go about achieving that effect in Worldographer. What we want to do next is change the hills. Here's our plane hills, if you will. And that's what these guys all look like. So that's what we're going to fill in here. That's what area 20 is like, I believe, based on the icon. We do have one icon there. Was that the same? I mean, that looks like a very grassy area. I don't know. That's the nice thing about this is if I chose poorly, you can open it up in Worldographer and change it to whatever you think it should be. Got those. So then I can go ahead and change these mountains. And we can come down here to this section to get the same effect. And like I said, I can go to wide area here so that I can get that whole cluster of things at once. But it's often just easier to just stick to this and just paint over it as needed. Let me do this other hill. I don't want to forget that. And then we have this marsh here. I'm going to fill in that marsh. And then we're going to go back to our trace underlay. And in trace underlay, we're going to set this back down to 50 so I can kind of see both. And let me go back to the original and just checking what the original map looks like here for this. I wonder about these rivers. Do they really start kind of in the marshy area? Yes, they do. Okay, so Thorf is being very accurate with what was there then versus now. So we can copy that exactly. So we're going to go to shapes and we're going to go to line and we're going to set the color of our line to be this with no fill. And then I'm going to just scroll up a little bit so we can get the whole thing into one view. And I can just kind of do this. And I'm just tracing. Oh, man, we don't want the elevation inverted. We just want this to be simple. And maybe do that. And we're going to draw our river in. And I'm going to do this semi-main branch. It's not the longest branch, but I'm going to do that one there like that. And I'm going to hold down control just so I can drag this one little point over a little. Then I will hit deselect so I can now also do this branch over here. then deselect again, and then just draw in this branch going up like that. Deselect. Now we're going to pick these other couple of lines that make our mouth of our river, if you will. And then I've got to now extend this guy out like this. And we got that one. Deselect again, so I can now build out this branch in as much detail as you want. Now I'm just using simple lines here. There are also curved lines, and with curved lines you can achieve nice curves where you put down a point and then two control points that will kind of dictate how much of a bend there is between a fourth point. And then it does two more points, which again dictate the bend to the next point. So now we've got all of that done. I want to continue on here, but I'm not sure how much value there's going to be. So you can probably imagine I'm probably going to skip ahead as I'm editing the video to something else. Let me see how quickly I can do this. And about 1 hour went by. We can see our whole Isle of Dread. Here we go. What do you think, sirs? So we're going to do a part 2 of this, which will fill in some more of the details and fix a few things, as well as massage the terrain a little bit, like make some jungle hills and so forth. We'll also show how to hide portions of the map in Worldographer so you can export a version of it for your players periodically as you're playing the game, cover up portions of it and that sort of thing. So I hope that's really useful to you. I've been wanting to get back to actually showing Worldographer, using Worldographer in videos to create maps so that you can see how it's done. And hey, we have the bonus of we'll have a completed map to share so that anybody playing Isle of Dread or just wanting a map like this will be able to grab it and use it. So again, hope you found this useful and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.